now. How many more years are you still going to do this?
Okay, so I'm 61 now, and I envisage most probably 2 more years. I don't see myself doing that. My body's not too happy about my swing. It doesn't like rotary movement, but I'll certainly play for another couple more years.
At 72, you don't expect a golf legend to admit fear. But when Mark McNulty names 7 golfers who made him fear for his career, he's not confessing weakness. He's revealing the secret that turned him into one of golf's most successful players. A man with 59 professional wins who spent 83 weeks in the world's top 10. These 7 names aren't just competitors. They're the giants who shaped every part of his game. What kind of player forces a champion to level up? McNulty isn't some journeyman telling war stories. Born in southern Rhodesia in 1953, he turned professional in 1977 and built a career that most golfers only dream about. 16 wins on the European Tour, 33 wins on the Sunshine Tour, 8 more on the Champions Tour, including a senior major. He peaked at world number 6 in October 1987, and his best finish in a major championship was second place at the 1990 Open Championship at St. Andrews. This is a man who knew what excellence looked like because he lived it for decades. But here's the thing about McNulty's fear. It wasn't about losing. It wasn't about failure. It was about standards. It was about measuring himself against the best and refusing to fall short. When he talks about these 7 golfers, he's talking about the mirrors he held up to his own game, the benchmarks that pushed him harder every single day. 5 of them were ghosts from history, legends whose shadows stretched across every fairway. 2 were flesh and blood rivals who stood between him and championships. Together they built the competitor we know as Supermac. Understanding McNulty's career requires understanding where he came from and what he accomplished. Southern Rhodesia in 1953 wasn't exactly a hotbed of professional golf. The path from there to the upper reaches of the world rankings was long and difficult. When McNulty turned professional in 1977, he was entering a sport dominated by established stars, players who had already carved out their territories and their legacies. He had to build his reputation tournament by tournament, win by win, proving that he belonged among the elite. His success on the Sunshine Tour became his foundation. Winning the Order of Merit 8 times wasn't just about collecting trophies. It was about establishing dominance in his region, about proving he could be the best week after week, year after year. Those 33 Sunshine Tour victories represent consistency and excellence over more than 2 decades of competition. But McNulty never saw regional success as enough. He wanted to prove himself on the global stage, to test his game against the best players in the world. That ambition drove him to the European Tour, where he won 16 times against world-class fields. The European Tour wins were different from the Sunshine Tour victories. They came against deeper fields, on different courses, under different pressures. Every win there was validation that his game traveled, that the skills he'd honed could stand up anywhere. And they did. McNulty's ability to compete at the highest level for so long speaks to the foundation he built. His swing held up, his putting held up, his mental game held up. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because a player commits to the kind of excellence those 7 giants represented. Let's start with the ghosts, the idols who shaped his identity before he ever faced a real opponent. McNulty's development as a golfer followed a clear path, and it's written right there in his PGA Tour biography. First, he modeled his game after Arnold Palmer. Then, as he grew older, he refined it like Gary Player. That's not just copying swings, that's building a philosophy. Arnold Palmer was McNulty's first fear, the fear of not mattering. When young McNulty turned pro in the late 70s, Palmer's shadow still dominated the sport. The king represented everything glamorous about professional golf: attacking play, charisma, the go-for-broke charge that made galleries roar. Palmer didn't just play golf, he performed it. For a kid from southern Rhodesia trying to make his mark on the world stage, Palmer was the model of what a star looked like. McNulty's early fear was simple. What if I don't leave a mark? What if I'm just another name? So he borrowed Palmer's swagger, that aggressive, heroic style that made golf feel like an adventure. But swagger alone doesn't win 59 tournaments. As McNulty matured, he realized he needed something more durable than flair. He needed discipline. That's where Gary Player entered the picture. If Palmer was the fear of not being a star, Player was the fear of being outworked. Player represented everything Palmer wasn't: iron discipline, legendary fitness, a short game built through thousands of hours of practice. Player was the grinder, the professional who understood that talent was just the starting point. Hard work was everything else. This wasn't a random choice. McNulty built his career on the Sunshine Tour in Southern Africa, and Gary Player was the king of that tour. To succeed there, McNulty had to adopt Player's philosophy. The results speak for themselves. McNulty won 33 times on the Sunshine Tour and claimed its Order of Merit 8 times. He's second only to Gary Player himself in total Sunshine Tour victories. That's not coincidence. That's cause and effect. McNulty took Palmer's attacking instinct and married it to Player's relentless work ethic. He became the complete package. Think about what that transformation meant in practical terms. Early McNulty was the swashbuckler, the player who went for broke and tried to dazzle. Mature McNulty was the grinder who showed up every day ready to work, who understood that fitness and preparation were just as important as talent. Players' influence showed up in every aspect of his game. The short game that saved strokes, the physical conditioning that let him compete into his 50s, the mental toughness that kept him focused through 4 rounds. McNulty didn't just admire player from a distance. He studied him, copied him, and became the second best player in Sunshine Tour history because of it. The evolution from Palmer to player also tells us something deeper about McNulty's self-awareness. He recognized that his early model wasn't sustainable. He saw the limits of flair without foundation. That recognition takes humility and intelligence. Many players stick with their natural style even when it's not working. McNulty was willing to rebuild himself, to add layers to his game, to become something more complete. That willingness to evolve is what separates good careers from great ones. If you want to subscribe and stay with us, hit that button now. And drop a comment telling us which philosophy you think matters more in golf: Palmer's flair or player's grind. We want to hear your take. But McNulty didn't stop with Palmer and player. He looked deeper into history and built what he called his dream foursome. 3 more legends who represented the 3 pillars of the perfect golfer: Bobby Locke, Ben Hogan, Walter Hagen. Each one represented a different fear, a different standard McNulty felt he had to meet. Bobby Locke was the putting savant, South Africa's first global golf hero. A 4-time Open champion whose name was synonymous with one thing: perfection on the greens. Locke wasn't just good at putting. He was an artist, a master whose calm temperament and flawless stroke set an impossible standard. For McNulty, this choice was personal because he himself was a great putter. People who played with him said he was the best putter they ever saw. McNulty described it as a gift, something you're born with, something that lives inside you. When he named Locke to his dream team, he was naming the ghost he chased every time he stood over a putt. The fear wasn't that he couldn't putt. The fear was that he wouldn't be the absolute best at what he did best. That's the fear of the specialist, the pressure to be perfect in your own specialty. Ben Hogan represented a different pillar. If Locke was the artist, Hogan was the scientist. Hogan's fear was the fear of technical imperfection, the fear of a swing that couldn't be repeated under pressure. Hogan was the ultimate standard for ball striking, a man who built his game on mechanical precision and dedication. And once again, this fear reflected McNulty's own values. People praised his consistently repeatable swing, his well-balanced mechanics that allowed him to hit the same shot over and over when it mattered most. McNulty didn't fear Hogan because he couldn't be like him. He feared Hogan because that standard demanded constant vigilance. Every practice session was a fight against technical flaws, a daily battle to maintain that Hogan-level reliability. Walter Hagen completed the trinity. Hagen wasn't about swing mechanics or putting strokes. Hagen was about winning. He was about flair and nerve and mental toughness. Hagen elevated professional golf from a blue-collar trade to a glamorous profession. He carried himself like a champion and backed it up with results. For McNulty, Hagen represented the fear of the mental game, the fear of not closing, the fear of not having the guts to win when everything was on the line. Hagen was the showman, the player who thrived under pressure and never backed down. So now we have the complete blueprint. Ben Hogan gave McNulty the perfect swing. Bobby Locke gave him the perfect putting stroke. Walter Hagen gave him the perfect mind. Palmer gave him the flair. Player gave him the discipline. These 5 ghosts weren't random heroes. They were the composite image of the golfer McNulty wanted to become. Every win in his 59 victory career was proof that he'd absorbed their lessons, that he'd conquered those fears by turning them into fuel. But ghosts are philosophical. They're distant. The real test of a competitor comes when you face someone in the arena, when another human being wants the same trophy you do. That's where McNulty's final 2 fears come in: Ian Woosnam and Nick Faldo. One was the fear overcome. One was the fear realized. Ian Woosnam was part of the Big Five that dominated European golf in the 80s. He was world-class, hungry, and right there beside McNulty in every tournament that mattered. The fear Woosnam represented was direct competition, the anxiety of knowing that even your best might not be enough. But McNulty conquered that fear in one defining moment: May 31st, 1987, the final hole of the Dunhill British Masters. McNulty and Woosnam were tied. McNulty had 68 yards to the pin. Under crushing pressure, he hit a pitch shot to 9 feet and made the putt to win. He calls it the best shot of his career, and it's easy to see why. That wasn't just a win, that was validation. He beat a world-class rival with a shot that combined Hogan's mechanics, Locke's touch, and Hagen's nerve. 5 months later, McNulty reached world number 6, his career peak. That's not a coincidence. Beating Woosnam proved to McNulty that his game was complete, that he belonged at the elite level. The fear of his contemporaries was conquered. He'd faced down a giant and won. The timing of that victory tells us everything we need to know about momentum in professional golf. McNulty entered 1987 as a very good player. He left it as a top 10 player in the world. What changed? Confidence, belief, proof. When you beat a world-class opponent with everything on the line, something shifts inside you. You stop wondering if you're good enough. You know you're good enough. That knowledge becomes armor. It protects you in future battles. It lets you play freely because you've already proven what you can do. McNulty's rise to number 6 wasn't built on one win, but that win against Woosnam was the keystone. It was the moment when all the pieces came together. The Palmer flair, the player discipline, the lock touch, the Hogan mechanics, the Hagen nerve. All of it crystallized in one pressure shot on one crucial hole. That's what champions do. They take everything they've learned and deploy it when it matters most. McNulty did exactly that, and his career trajectory changed forever. But then came Nick Faldo. If Woosnam was the fear overcome, Faldo was the fear that never went away. Faldo represented the ceiling, the cruel truth that sometimes your absolute best still isn't enough. This reality hit McNulty hardest at the 1990 Open Championship at St. Andrews. Faldo had already won the Masters that year and was playing at an untouchable level. McNulty entered the final round tied for 20th place, 6 shots off the pace. What happened next was one of the greatest rounds of his life. While others struggled with the course, McNulty thrived. He hit outstanding shot after outstanding shot, climbing the leaderboard with an incredible final round 65, the lowest score of the day. That charge vaulted him all the way to 2nd place, tied with Payne Stewart. It remains his best finish in a major championship, and yet he was still 5 shots behind Faldo. Faldo had built such a commanding lead through 3 rounds that even his coasting 71 on Sunday was more than enough to win by 5 strokes. McNulty shot 6 strokes better than Faldo in the final round, and still finished 5 shots back. This is the life of a world-class player in an all-time great era. McNulty's 65 would have won most Opens, but he ran into Faldo at his absolute peak, and Faldo's standard was simply higher. That 2nd place finish is simultaneously McNulty's greatest achievement and the most powerful example of the fear he's describing. It's the realization that another man's ceiling was beyond your reach, no matter how hard you pushed. Think about what that means. McNulty fired a 65 in the final round of the Open Championship at St. Andrews. He made the lowest score of the day. He jumped from 20th place to 2nd, and he still lost by 5. That's not a failure, that's a lesson in perspective. Faldo's 18 under par for the tournament was a statement, and McNulty's 13 under was the best answer anyone else could give. The fear Faldo inspired wasn't that McNulty couldn't compete. It was that even his peak couldn't match the absolute highest standard of the era. But here's the beautiful part. McNulty didn't let that fear break him. He used it. Every single one of these 7 fears became a building block. Palmer taught him to attack. Player taught him to grind. Locke taught him to trust his touch. Hogan taught him to build a repeatable swing. Hagen taught him to close. Woosnam proved he could win under pressure. And Faldo showed him the ultimate benchmark, the standard that pulled him to his greatest major performance. McNulty's 59 professional wins didn't happen despite these 7 giants. They happened because of them. His 83 weeks in the top 10 weren't achieved by ignoring the competition. They were achieved by studying it, respecting it, and using it as fuel. His peak ranking of 6 in the world wasn't luck. It was the result of decades spent chasing ghosts and battling rivals, of turning fear into motivation. At 72, Mark McNulty can look back and see the architecture of his career. Palmer gave him style. Player gave him substance. Locke gave him feel. Hogan gave him mechanics. Hagen gave him nerve. Woosnam gave him proof. Faldo gave him perspective. These 7 names aren't a list of people who scared him. They're a list of people who built him. That's the real lesson here. The best competitors don't run from fear. They run toward it. They find the people who make them uncomfortable and they study them. They find the standards that seem impossible and they chase them. McNulty's willingness to name these 7 giants isn't an admission of inferiority. It's an act of humility and self-awareness. It's the mark of a true champion who understood that greatness isn't built in isolation. It's built in the shadow of giants. So when McNulty talks about fearing for his career, he's not talking about weakness. He's talking about the engine that drove him for decades. He's talking about the standards that pulled him higher, the rivals that pushed him harder, and the ghosts that made him better. His 59 wins are the proof. His place among the elite is the result. And his story is the blueprint for anyone who wants to compete at the highest level. If you made it this far, do us a favor, subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment telling us which of McNulty's 7 giants you think had the biggest impact on his career. Was it the idols who shaped his philosophy, or the rivals who tested him in the arena? We're reading every single comment. Thanks for watching.